Hello, this is a bookshelf tour. Obviously, my bookshelf. There's about 130, 140 books on here that I'm going to talk through. Hopefully by the end of this video you're going to see at least one book that takes your fancy, piques your interest. You add it to your own book collection. It may even become one of your favourite books of all time, you never know. No disrespect to any of these books. If only just pull it out and talk about it for a few seconds. Doesn't mean it's no good. Just means that we're pressed for time, trying to expedite this process. And this video would be about 8 hours long otherwise. First book, Ham on Rye by Charles Bukowski. Probably my favourite book of all time. It's about his childhood growing up in Los Angeles. He had abusive parents, and he had the most horrendous acne you can get. Acne vulgaris, which is boils on his upper body, all over his face. It's about his initial experience with alcohol, women, fights he had at school, being an outcast. But it's extremely, it's so funny. You're just laughing all the way through the book, but then you turn a page and you just feel so sorry for him, some of the stuff he was going through. Bukowski's my favourite writer. No one moves me like Bukowski. I read this book during COVID, which enhanced the enjoyment of it. Going through what we all went through during COVID, it cheered me up. So this is my favourite book of all time at the moment. Maybe I'll find another book that tops it. I hope so. I'm looking for that book. Okay, Endurance by Alfred Lansing. It's about Shackleton's voyage to the Antarctic. It goes wrong, they get stuck in the ice, and it's about the expeditions, the people in the expedition, their experiences. In the freezing weather, hopeless, no sign of rescue. They're stranded. There's no way they're going to get out. It seems that way, but in the end, they patch things up. One of the lifeboats they had, and they managed to get out. But if you're ever lying in bed in the morning, you can't bother to get up for work, just think of this and what they went through, and what human beings are capable of getting through in life. Stalingrad, which I suppose is quite similar to Endurance. It's about a battle in World War II between the Soviets and the Germans. It's the costliest battle of the war, bloodiest battle of the war. More dead in this battle than any other battle, I think, in World War II. The Germans are surrounded. In the end, it's freezing cold. They're disease-ridden, they're dropping like flies. They can't get out, and they know that when they're captured, when the battle's over, they're going to be marched to prison camps in Russia. And very few of them made it home in the end. It reads more like a horror story than a battle in World War II. If you're looking for a good horror book, then read this book, because it is basically a horror story. Ironically, Stalingrad at the time, which is renamed now Volgograd, I believe, it had no strategic value, so they just wanted to take it because of the name of it, Stalin. And in the end, it all went, catastrophically wrong for the Germans. Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets by David Simon. So the author followed the Baltimore Homicide Department around for a year, 2 years, reported on everything they did, every murder they covered. And the murder rate in Baltimore at the time was pretty high. One particular case was the abduction and murder of a 11-year-old girl, which was particularly upsetting. They never did solve it. They had a fair idea of who was responsible, but they couldn't get a conviction. And the primary detective on the case really beat himself up over it. The other detectives, it's their downtime, drinking a lot, I suppose, to alleviate the stress of the job. It's a pretty thick book, but if you're interested in law enforcement, you'll get through this quick, because every page was so interesting. And nothing beats true stories in terms of law enforcement and whatnot. I prefer non-fiction to fiction when it comes to law enforcement. Shunt by Tom Riberton, story of James Hunt, the best sports biography I've ever read, I'd say. James Hunt is from a bygone era sportsman, spoke his mind, said it as it was. Not like today's sportsmen. The interviews you see today, you've watched one, you've watched them all, they're all boring. They're just worried about their endorsement deals, their sponsorships. They're not bothered about saying it as it is, and he did. He liked women, he liked drinking, same as this man. And he had a very endearing character. And of course, former world champion, Formula One racing driver. PF and Sedan, A Hymn to Love by Dominic Grimault and Patrick May. It's about the love affair between Edith Piaf and Marcel Sedan, the singer and the boxer. So an odd couple, but they were very much in love with each other until Marcel Sedan's plane crash, which killed him and ended their affair. And Piaf was devastated by it. No Beast So Fierce by Edward Bunker. It's about a prisoner, criminal who gets out of jail and he is struggling to adapt. He's institutionalized, can't adapt to life outside of prison, and the stuff he gets up to when he's out of jail. And I agree with Tarantino there. It is a fantastic crime novel. Karmalant's Matterhorn. It's about Vietnam War. Karmalant's, the author, was there. He was a lieutenant. He was only like 20, 21 years old. He's in charge of a platoon, and the story is about his experiences leading that platoon and all the problems that came along with it. So most of the stuff in this book, of course, is, well, all of it is true. It's his own experiences and stuff that he heard, but it's raw, it's graphic, it's incredible, really. I read this book in 3 days. Couldn't put it down. Once I started reading it, that was it. Forget what else I was doing. I'm finishing this book. One thing that sticks out from this was one of the platoon dies. They can't get a helicopter in to chopper him out, so they've got to carry him out. But of course, they're stuck in the jungle. It's horrendous conditions, boiling hot, and they're carrying this man out, taking it in turns to carry him. And as the days drag on, they still can't find a convenient place to get him out. His body is deteriorating, literally stuff dripping off the body. And it's just full of stuff like that. It's just so interesting. I'll definitely read this book again at some point. A Waiter in Paris by Edward Chisholm. So he's an Englishman, moves to France with his girlfriend. They split up, she leaves, but he stays. Yeah, he wants to learn the French language. He doesn't speak French, so he has to get a job. Otherwise he can't stay. He's running out of money. He's living in these grotty places in Paris, hand-to-mouth existence, and becoming a waiter is not as easy as you think. It's got its own sort of internal politics. They're not being very nice to him. But gradually he gets the hang of the job and he learns his French. His grasp of the French language is getting better and better. And it's just full of really funny, humorous, interesting stories. It's a true story, so I suppose it's a great lesson about perseverance and never giving up in there. The Black Count by Tom Rees. It's about General Alexandre Dumas. He was a general in the French army in the Napoleonic era. You can imagine what it was like back then. A man of colour as a general was rare. He worked his way up the ranks through pure merit, not by kissing anyone's backside. He did it just because of his prowess, his extraordinary military acumen on the battlefield. But Napoleon didn't like him, of course. He's been sent home from Egypt. He's on a boat and the boat starts sinking, literally. So they have to start jettisoning all the stuff off the side of the boat, expensive military equipment, horses, rare coffee that they've got from Egypt they're going to sell back in France. It all has to go over the side of the boat because it's sinking. And it's just full of really interesting stories like that. He had an incredible life. This is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. He was a paediatrician, worked on the labour unit, births, really long hours, unsociable hours, so much responsibility. But he kept a journal of the 8-9 years he worked in the NHS, and it's just so funny. The stories that he accumulated over his career. One of the funniest books I've ever read. Okay, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Yeah, it's an ancient book about strategy, which you can still apply these principles to modern day life. Machiavelli, which is similar to The Art of War, The Prince. Again, it's Machiavelli lived in Italy in the sort of the Borgias era, and it's his advice about strategy. So similar to The Art of War, and both of these books inspired this book, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, which is the modern day version of The Art of War and Machiavelli. I could talk about this book all day. Reading it, I think, changed my life, changed my perspective on life. I wish I'd have read it when I was about 15. It would have saved me a lot of trouble in my life, put it that way. 48 laws. So law number 1, for example, never outshine the master. I did that so many times. If you're working in difficult work environments, you should read this book, because it just explains to you what other people are like, and the underhandedness, the deviousness, the connivingness of other people. It's not telling you to be that way yourself. It's just explaining what they're like and how to understand them and how to navigate those particular issues. They should just basically give everyone who leaves school a copy of this when they leave. So there you go. You're going to need it. The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. It's the best self-help book I've ever read. It's just really short and concise. It doesn't waste the page. Everything in it just sticks with you. Stay Out of New Orleans, which is ironic because I've just got back. City of New Orleans fascinates me. I love the front cover of this book. This creepy old house, probably gutted from Hurricane Katrina. So it's a collection of stories of people who lived in New Orleans, urban stories, drug addicts, prostitutes, hustlers, gangsters. And one of the things that sticks in my memory from this book is, if you're going to do drugs, pick out a place to do them where you're not going to pass out and the local wildlife can get to you. Pimp by Iceberg Slim. Yeah, it's self-explanatory. That's what he did for a living. It's extremely misogynistic, violence towards women, as you can probably understand if you are curious about reading this book. I will just caution you. Yeah, it pulls no punches, but it's a remarkable piece of writing. The Heroin Diaries by Nikki Sixx, former rock star with Motley Crue. He was a drug addict, obviously, and this is his diaries of his heroin use and some of the depravity that he would resort to get his fix of drugs. And it's hilarious, this book. It's just so funny. He writes, he likes Bukowski, apparently, Nikki Sixx, and there's a lot of sort of Bukowski style writing in it. Very, very funny book. Okay, Kobe Bryant, The Mamba Mentality. Yeah, he talks about his career, opponents, players, other players he came up against that he respected and were difficult to play against, injuries he had, his preparations for games, his in-game tactics, you name it, and it's just accompanied with some extraordinary pictures. The Sopranos, if you like the TV series, then get yourself a copy of this book. Just goes through the entire series. The Philosophy book, which details all the prominent philosophers in history, from the ancient Greeks all the way up to modern day. There's just one magazine on here I wanted to show you. 100 Greatest Boxers of All Time. And it's just full of amazing stories of boxers and their lives, their careers. Modern day all the way back to the early 1900s. And how tragic their lives were. So many of them. So many of them died young or had serious injuries from as a result of their careers. Long careers in boxing, including one individual here that I'll just read to you. Ad Wolgast. He was a boxer he was born 1888, died 1955. For the last 28 years of his life, Paul Wolgast trained enthusiastically for a fight with the long dead Joe Gans. He was in a psychiatric unit, I suppose they called it that, but he had pugilistic dementia as a result of all of the punishment he took during his boxing career. Chasing the Light by Oliver Stone, his career in Hollywood and how he got into Hollywood. There he is in Vietnam before he began his career in Hollywood. Head Slap, Life and Times of Deacon Jones, former NFL player, from that tough era where you could get away with a lot more on the field, including the old head slap. Hamburger Hill, the dust cover didn't come with this book when I bought it off eBay or wherever it was from, but this book is amazing. It's a battle in Vietnam, 1969. They're trying to get up the hill. The NVA are encamped on it. They can't get them off. It drags on for days and days, and then in the end, when they took the hill, they just gave it up again. But the stories from the people who were there are in this book, and it just really brings it to life. You feel like you're there on that hill in the battle. There is one story in the book that I wanted to read. So basically, so many people have been killed in this battle that they're now bringing people up from the rear, cooks and truck drivers. So I'll just read this little piece for you. Unfortunately, most of the replacements were not infantrymen, but cooks, truck drivers, and other rear area men. The replacement sent to SP4 Anthony Brezina's squad was a short, chubby cook from Camp Evans. He arrived just as fighter bombers were dropping 500-pound bombs on Dong Ap Bia. He stood there in wild-eyed terror as the bombs went off, his hands shaking, his mouth hanging open like a trapdoor. "What the f are you doing out here?" someone asked. "I'm a replacement," the cook mumbled. "You?" "Yeah." "You've got to be shitting me," someone else said. "No, I don't think so." Like sharks moving in for the kill, the squad moved in around the cook. They all knew him. Earlier in the year, after more than 2 months in the bush, Bravo Company returned to Camp Evans with a 2-day stand-down, every hour of which they expected to spend either sleeping or drinking. They discovered instead that this cook and a number of his friends had arranged things so that men from Bravo had to pull their bunker guard for them. "They must be scraping up the streets of Evans still," another man said. "Look at this pitiful piece of shit." "What do you want me to do?" the cook asked. "Here, you look big enough," Brezina said, shoving an M60 machine gun into the man's hands. The cook struggled to keep from dropping the machine gun. "But I don't know how to use it." "Then you better learn quick," a man on Brezina's right said. "If you don't, you won't be around long." Okay, Bad as I Want to Be by Dennis Rodman, basketball player of the Chicago Bulls. There he is, naked on a Harley Davidson, as you'd expect. There he is, naked on the back. It's the funniest sports book I've ever read. He talks about why he should be being paid more than the other NBA basketball players. But it also starts, it's quite extraordinary the way it starts. Back in the 90s, mental health wasn't really a subject that sportsmen discussed. Nowadays, they discuss it all the time, but back then it wasn't. I think you were just seen as someone who's crazy if you did even discuss it. But this is how the book starts. On an April night in 1993, I sat in the cab of my pickup truck with a rifle in my lap, deciding whether to kill myself. Now, that's how the book starts, but again, he set a trend and it was brave to talk about his mental health back then. And a lot of people, I don't think they give him enough credit. I mean, he's the first sportsman to get tattoos, but he was also very effective on the court. He wasn't just some average player. 7 years in a row, he was he led the league in rebounds. So, as I said, it's one of the funniest sports books I've ever read because of how outrageous he is. Rikers Island, an oral history by Graham Raymond and Reuven Blue. So it's about people who were in Rikers Island, either in prison or who worked there, and their testimonies and their experiences of being in that hellish place. One individual's been arrested for riding his bike up the wrong way in New York, and he spends like 3 nights in Rikers Island. He's not a criminal, and even just his story is hilarious. He needs to find somewhere to use the toilet, and he can't because they're all blocked and flooded. There's so many fights going on. The drug use is rampant. The corruption among the guards is off the charts. It's very entertaining book. The Last Great Fight by Joe Layden, which is the story of Mike Tyson's heavyweight title fight against Buster Douglas, which Douglas won. Douglas' mum passed away a couple of weeks before the fight, which inspired him to beat the unbeatable, as it was then, Mike Tyson. Heat 2, Michael Mann, Meg Gardner. So if you've seen the film and you enjoyed it, you'll definitely like this book. So it goes into detail about Al Pacino's character. He was a cop in Chicago before going to Los Angeles, and he's was chasing down some really vile, despicable criminals, home invasion, burglars, murderers, and working with cops who were like old school Chicago cops who thought nothing of throwing someone off the top of a building, saying that they jumped. And of course it goes into detail about Robert De Niro's character's crew and what happened after the bank robbery that went wrong in the film. Life Sentence by Mark Bowden. So this individual here was a gang leader in Baltimore. There's a lot of murders, a lot of ruthless sort of killings to keep his position as the leader of the gang and to stifle any other gangs in Baltimore. They're sort of anything that they were doing to keep them lower than the gang that he was in charge of. Just really gritty. I enjoyed the Homicide on the Killing Streets, and this is set in the same place, but now sort of modern day version of that story. Robert Greene, The Daily Laws. So it goes through every day is a different profound paragraph on power, seduction, mastery, strategy, and human nature. Labyrinth by Randall Sullivan. So if you like Biggie and Tupac, then read this book because it talks about their murders. They're still unsolved to this day. I like both of them. Their music didn't differentiate. Enjoy them very much. Everything, their music, their albums. I'm an expert on both of them, but with this book, it's what do they call it? Unputdownable. Once you start reading it, and you start reading about the murkiness and the corruption involved in their murders, as I said, they're still unsolved. Yet, despite all the witnesses and God knows how many people were there watching the murders take place, still unsolved. And it goes into the case. The detective who was originally put on the case was taken off because he was just uncovering too much. And the LAPD were concerned about scandal back then because of the Rampart scandal and the Rodney King beat in the aftermath of that. So they didn't want any more scandal. And if you like the film Training Day, then the character played by Denzel Washington is this man, and he was a corrupt police officer in the Charles Bukowski, post office. Yeah, he was a mailman, postman, and it's about his experiences doing that job. Very funny. George Pelecanos, Drama City. It's an excellent book about crime in Washington DC, gangsters, drug dealers that are attacking one another, and the parole officer who sort of gets in the middle of it, and an individual who's like an animal rescue, like stray dog fellow who just used to be part of one of the gangs but has gone straight, and sort of gets in the middle of it as well. It's just fantastic. But Mafia Philosopher by Sean Atwood, 2 Tonys. Sean Atwood was in prison in Arizona. He met this fella, 2 Tonys, who was in the mafia. So he helped him out in prison because he was like a fresh fish, didn't understand prison politics, and 2 Tonys took him under his wing, but then told him about his life and his life story. And it's very entertaining book. Empire of the Summer Moon by S.C. Gwynne. It's about a particularly tough, formidable Native American faction who were known for their prowess in battles, and were sort of unbeatable in their horsemanship. You know, they could ride a horse and just shoot at the same time, no problem. And it's probably the best book about Native Americans that I've ever read. Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, one of the best self-help books I've ever read. Attitude is Everything by Jeff Keller. Again, another one of those self-help books that just stays with you. One of the principles in this that stuck with me was learn someone's first name and use it, because people think a lot better of you if you do that, if you make the effort to learn their first name and you just keep using it. Barbarian Days by William Finnegan. It's about surfing ostensibly, but it's also about travel and all the different places in the world that he surfed and the adventures he got into. Scenes from My Life by Michael K. Williams. The actor from The Wire played Omar. Yeah, his life story, how he got that scar on his face. Really enjoyed watching him on The Wire and the other stuff that he did. Stop the Ride, I Want to Get Off by Dave Courtney. He was a criminal villain in London. Very, very funny man. Very funny book. One of the funniest books I've ever read. His life and his experiences. My Manor by Charlie Richardson. Again, an old school gangster in London. He was rivals with the Krays, who were from East London. He was from South London. Again, just another humorous and interesting account of his life, being a gangster and then going to prison, and all the stuff that he was up to. Bloods by Wallace Terry. So these are black veterans of the Vietnam War, about 12 different stories of their experiences in Vietnam and everything they dealt with, and how difficult it was for some of them to adjust when they got back from Vietnam. If you've seen the film Dead Presidents, this book inspired that film. One of the stories in this book is the story of, what was the character's name? The main character in Dead Presidents. I can't remember the character's name. Played by Lorenz Tate, good actor. Bukowski, Women. Yes, his experiences with women. Very funny book, very graphic. Book about sex. Karma Lance, What It's Like to Go to War. This is probably my favourite book cover. So this picture was taken in Vietnam, 1968, the Battle of Hue. And you can just see from the expression on this man's face, he looks concerned. Picture tells 1,000 words. And this is about Karma Lance's experiences in the military. including when he got home from Vietnam. I think someone spat in his face. He was still in his uniform, and that was the resentment towards the Vietnam War at the time. Literally spat in his face. Again, look at that front cover. That picture's amazing. That picture was taken by the British photographer Don McCullum, who was in the Battle of Hue 1968, following the company that this gentleman was a part of. And this is one of the pictures he took. There's so many pictures he took in that battle that are amazing. The Boy, The Mole, The Fox and the Horse. It's a nice little book about friendship and love. Triangle, The Fire That Changed America. So this particular fire happened in 1912. It happened on this floor here, one of the top floors. This building's still in New York. It's a brown building. Many of the people jumped from this floor, obviously forced out by the flames, the heat and the smoke. Health and safety wasn't a big deal back then. So these were shirtwaist makers on very low pay, working very long hours. Someone dropped a cigarette, it ignited all of the extra fragments and stuff they're cutting up, and the doors were locked, so they couldn't get out. So this is a story of that fire and how it changed health and safety laws and whatnot, union laws in America. Strange Ways, a prison officer story by Neil Samworth. He was a prison officer in the United Kingdom. All of his experiences as a prison officer, which were pretty brutal, horrific at times. Four Kings by George Kimball, which is about the rivalry between Leonard Hagler Hearns and Duran, their lives and the fights in the ring that they had. Season of Night, New Orleans, Life After Katrina by Ian McNulty. So he returned to New Orleans after the flood. One of the first people, and it was his experience living in the empty post New Orleans, and all the problems with that, including at one point being chased down the street by wild dogs who were after him. Five Families by Selwyn Raab. So this is about the 5 mafia families in New York, their entire histories, power struggles, wars, including, this, of course. This is Paul Castellano after he'd been assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in New York. So it talks about all 5 families. Who are they? Gambino, Lucchese. Off the top of my head, I forgot. And the other 3, I can't believe I've forgotten them, but you know what I mean. The 5 families. Lucchese, Gambino, and the other 3. Profaci, yeah, that's one. When Pride Still Mattered by David Moranis. Life of Vince Lombardi. He was head coach of the Green Bay Packers, and how he managed that team and his life. Jeffrey Archer, Prison Diary, the author and former politician. He went to jail, and these were his experiences when he was incarcerated. Fire and Fear, the inside story of Mike Tyson, Jose Torres. So Mike Tyson's life up to about 1990, before he went to jail, everything that he was doing outside the ring. Jose Torres was in his camp, but they fell out. And when he released this book, Mike Tyson said it was mostly lies, but you read this book and it's very entertaining. Romeo Dallaire, Shake Hands with the Devil. He was in the UN in Rwanda during the genocide when it was all kicking off, and his experience trying to do the best he could with the UN in Rwanda at that time. War, the 33 Strategies of by Robert Greene. Not just war literally, but war in life. He uses historical examples of things that have gone on that you can apply to today. And once you start reading Robert Greene's books, you become a fan of his. Like, well, I have certainly. The 50th Law. He did a book with 50 Cent. Talks about his music career and how difficult it was navigating the music industry, and also about his life, his earliest experiences, being shot, his not having his parents. He doesn't know who his dad is. His mum died when he was quite young, and collaborate with Robert Greene, which is a great idea. Maybe Jay-Z would have done it. You know, great idea from 50 Cent, and it was a good book. Benny by John Burroughs. He was a boxer in the early 1900s. He's Scottish. He was unfortunately had a drink problem, but he was quite an endearing character. He was one fight, I think. His opponent weighed in a couple of overweight, and he's just like, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll fight anyway." But he also, he had the terrible drink problem. Days of Grace by Arthur Ashe, former tennis player. His life. Augustus, his life, Roman emperor. One of the better Roman emperors. He was completely unselfish, thought of his people first instead of himself. Uncorruptible. And known as, one of the good emperors. Teddy Atlas, From the Streets to the Ring. The boxing trainer, great philosopher, a great motivator, Tyson's former trainer. Jack Rollins, Cabinet of Dr. Blessings, a Victorian Gothic horror novel. I love that front cover. Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire by Amanda Foreman. It's a biography of the Duchess of Devonshire and the things that she would get up to, a lot of gambling. Night Train, Sonny Liston's story, his life, his upbringing, and his mysterious death. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, just another self-help book that stuck with me. Love the title of the book. Sebastian Junger, Tribe. Again, it's about loneliness, not being on your own too much. You need people in your life. It's unhealthy to be on your own. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, just a nice short book with loads of profound sayings. Robert Graves, Goodbye to All That. It's a World War I book. His experiences there and how awful it was, trench warfare. Bill Romanowski, Romo, former NFL player. Love the cover of the book. He's got some interesting perspectives and theories on the NFL and his career, what he did, what he got up to. Survival Math by Mitchell S. Jackson, about his life and his extended family, his experiences with a difficult upbringing. David Grann, The Wager, Shipwreck, Mutiny and Murder. Literally, there were two different accounts. There was two sets of survivors, and they had completely different accounts of what went on the ship. Again, one of the better books I read the year before last. Sopranos Sessions. Now, if you like The Sopranos, definitely read this book. It goes into detail on every episode. I learnt so much more when I watched The Sopranos. I was probably about early 20s, probably not old enough to appreciate it, but now I'm going to watch it again. And so reading this book just enlightened me on a lot of stuff I didn't know. King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild. Not for the faint-hearted. It's about the greed, terror, heroism in colonial Africa. And that front cover is very eye-catching. It's just ghostly face of King Leopold. And just how despicable it was. High Risers, Cabrini Green and the Fate of American Public Housing by Ben Austin. So this is Cabrini Green. It was a housing project in Chicago. It was rife in the sort of late 80s, 90s with crime. At one point, the police just wouldn't even go in there because it was just lawless. The gangs just basically controlled it. If you've seen the film Candyman, that's where it was set. There was all sorts of stuff that went on there, and eventually they knocked it all down. They had to because it was out of control. Now it's gentrified. The neighbourhood's gone. It's been replaced by like mixed income people. But this is about people who live there and their experiences of living in Cabrini Green. Mastery by Robert Greene. Again, once you start reading Robert Greene's books, you'll just keep reading all of them. This is about picking a subject in life and just sticking with it. The Maverick Mindset, The Journey from Fear to Freedom by Doug Hall. Mike Tyson in an interview said he read it, so I thought, okay, well, if Tyson read it, I'm going to read it. Hue, 1968 by Mark Bowden, The Battle in the Vietnam War, in depth. If you've seen the film Full Metal Jacket, this is where the second part of the film takes place. It's pretty shocking. Some of the stories, one in particular, young man gets there, he's only been in Vietnam a couple of weeks, he's basically acclimatising to the place. He gets to this battle, and within half an hour he was killed, shot in the throat. Another individual who turned up, he was given a flak jacket, I believe they call it, a bulletproof vest. And it had a hole in it with blood around it, so it belonged to someone else, and then they gave it to him. It's the desperation of the battle. It was close quarter fighting that went on for a week or so, a couple of weeks, and people who were there and their accounts of what went on. Seduction by Robert Greene. So different forms of seduction, history's best seducers, different ways you can seduce someone. Erotic Vagrancy, everything about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor by Roger Lewis, their love affair. Caesar by Adrian Goldsworthy, Julius Caesar's life, the former Roman emperor, for everything he did, working his way up the ranks in the Roman military, his conquering of Gaul, the civil war he had with Pompey, and then literally being stabbed in the back when he was killed. Love and Louis XIV, The Women in the Life of the Sun King, Antonia Fraser, Louis XIV, Love Life. Showboat, The Life of Kobe Bryant, so it goes through his whole career, from when he was drafted out of high school, 17 years old, for the Lakers, all the way up to his last match where he dropped, 60 points in his last game. But this was released, of course, before his untimely demise. It just goes into everything that went on during his career. Stephen King. Now, I love the film, not the remake. Didn't care for it, but the original film, the 1990 film. This is the best Stephen King book I've read. It's quite a commitment, 1,000 pages. But it goes into detail, especially about the bullies and their backgrounds and how disturbed they are. Jack the Ripper, A Complete History of Philip Sugden. Yep, you need a book about Jack the Ripper. Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, one of the most violent books I've ever read. It's about the Wild West and, bounty hunters looking for scalps. Clive Barker, Books of Blood. I really enjoyed Hellraiser, the movie, and Candyman, and Clive Barker was responsible for those two films, so I wanted to read one of his books, and I enjoyed reading this. Bad Intentions, the Mike Tyson story. I think the best Mike Tyson book there is. His career up to about 1991, and everything that went on in and out of the ring in his life. No one interests me more than Tyson. He's the most interesting sportsman, other than Muhammad Ali, I think. You know, an extraordinary life. Errol Flynn, My Wicked Wicked Ways, his legendary autobiography and his exploits and his experiences in life. Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk, a collection of grisly stories, and a fantastic book cover. Love that book cover. Charles Bukowski, Pleasures of the Damned. It's Bukowski poetry. Al Pacino, Sonny Boy, his biography talks a lot about his childhood experiences, what inspired him to be an actor, his relationship with his mother, his grandfather, and some of the friends he had growing up in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and some of the stuff that he dealt with, issues he dealt with in Hollywood. Robert Greene, The Laws of Human Nature. Robert Greene's philosophy is we have to become human. He thinks we're animals, but you need to become a human being, and I agree with that. You do. And this book is about all the different types of feelings you have, like, you know, feeling an emotion and feeling it before you, not being able to help feeling emotional, and how we used to, before we invented language, we communicate by body language. So you can read when someone's upset with you or fed up with you just by their body language, because we could read that as human beings before we could invented language. And everything else in the book. I'll read that again one day. Tales of War. So it's a different battle for every day of the year, from the earliest battles in the history of warfare up to modern day. Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club. Yeah, I like the book, but of course I've seen the film, I don't know, 100 times. Probably more than 100 times. One Dead in Attic by Chris Rose, about Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath, including people who were dead in their homes. And they would spray paint One Dead in Attic to identify that there was someone in there. 9 Lives, another book about New Orleans, people who lived in New Orleans and their experiences. The Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson says about plague pits in London, digging them up unexpectedly, you know, digging the underground stations, and there's like past epidemics in London and plague pits. 2 Ton, One Night, One Fight is the boxing bout between Joe Louis, the world champion at the time, and Tony Galento, who was a massive underdog, not exactly physically fit. He was overweight, and but he had a great personality, and he knocks Joe Louis down early on in the fight. Then Joe Louis got up and gave him a beating. But it was an interesting disparity in character between the two, so it's just good to find a book about the actual fight. Band of Brothers, of course, Stephen Ambrose. Don't really need to talk about that book. Everyone knows about it. It's fantastic. Love the series. And the book complemented the series really well. Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. Yeah, it's an ancient way of living your life. You know, living with morals and decency and humility. Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, which is similar to the Book of the Five Rings. Ancient Chinese philosophy. The Last Hill. I found this book somewhere and read it and kept it, enjoyed it. It's about a battle in World War II. American Psycho. Like Fight Club, I've seen this film over 100 times. Laughed so much. It's not a horror, it's a comedy. The book is extremely graphic, goes into far more detail than what you see in the film. Marcus Aurelius, warrior, philosopher, emperor, one of the better emperors in Rome's history, by Frank McLean. Alchemy, Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, when they were manager and assistant manager of Hartlepool. Brian Clough, the greatest football manager of all time. Pironi, the champion that ever was. He was a Formula One racing driver from France, very charming individual. And he suffered a serious injury in a race and had to retire early on, and then suffered an untimely demise in his speedboat racing career. Edwin Torres, After Hours, which is, if you've seen Carlito's Way, this is the book. Burning in Water, Drowning in Flame by Charles Bukowski, more Bukowski poems. The Lost Soul of Eamon McGee, the boxer. His life growing up in Northern Ireland and his boxing career, which was, it's fair to say, ruined by his alcohol abuse and some of the problems that he would get into outside the ring. Walk on the Wild Side by Dennis Rodman. There he is again, naked. Yeah. Again, this is like the sequel to his first book, which wasn't as good as the first book, but I kept hold of it, so it must have been decent. God's Debris, A Thought Experiment by Scott Adams. So this is like a mailman, like a delivery driver, who delivers something to this man's house, and he walks in, and it's this wise, scholarly old man who just explains to him what life is all about. Brain Rules by John Medina. How the Brain Works. It's a good self-help book that I kept hold of. Once Upon a Time in Naples, Diego Maradona's football career whilst he was playing for Napoli in Italy, and the organised crime involved in it, and the difficulties he had, the injuries he had, and everything else that went on. Tony Adams, Addicted, former Arsenal captain. His career at Arsenal, of course, and his struggles with alcohol abuse. And he just talks very frankly about that, and he's been sober since. In 1996, I believe he gave up, and he's been sober since then, and some of the incredible achievements he had, and I wonder if he probably would have had a lot more if he hadn't have been a drinker, but it's very much part of football culture back then. 12 Gram by Jonathan Rendell. It's about book about gambling. Anna Devere Smith, Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992. It's about the LA riots in Los Angeles in 1992. The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris. It's about Victorian surgery in its most primitive, its earliest forms. We Own This City by Justin Fenton. It's a book about corrupt cops in Baltimore. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a philosopher, French philosopher. Not an easy book to get through, but I kept hold of it. De Profundis and the Ballad of Reading Gaol and Other Writings by Oscar Wilde. So Oscar Wilde's incarcerated, and he's bitter. He's been jilted by his lover, left to rot in prison, and of course one of the most famous poems ever written. Anthony Kiedis with Larry Sloman, Scar Tissue, lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, his life, very vivid, entertaining book. Man, Child and the Promised Land by Claude Brown. His life growing up in Harlem, and the difficulties that encountered in the 50s. Douglas Bader by John Frayne Turner. He was pilot in World War II, British Royal Air Force pilot. Lost both of his legs in an accident, but then was still able to fly a plane. Was one of the best pilots we had during the Battle of Britain and whatnot. He was finally captured. He had an interesting personality. And even when he was captured, he still managed to escape, even with no legs. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Again, great self-help book. More Bukowski poetry, You Get So Alone. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, another one of the famous self-help books that I've kept hold of. Pasolini, A Violent Life. It's about the slums in Rome. Slipping by White Blackmore. It's about drug use and extremely violent. Gets hooked on drugs and his life just is getting lower and lower and more depraved. What is the What by Dave Eggers. So he has to leave Sudan, and because of the conflict, and it's about his life trying to adapt to living in America. 7, I thought it was interesting that there's a book about the film. Watched the film again 100 times. Yeah, the film is much better than the book. It's just the novel version of it, but it's all right. A Little Knowledge is a Dangerous Thing. John Sitton, he was a football manager in England. The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. Yes, I've read it. I understand the philosophy, the principle. Do I practice it? No, I don't. I'm too lazy, I think. Rory Stewart, Politics on the Edge, the former politician and his experiences as a politician. Joe Louis, The Brown Bomber, his life and career, the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time, other than Mike Tyson, I think. And what a fantastic character he was. He stopped his career during World War II and joined the army, which is quite remarkable when you think about it. Again, he had a fantastic personality. He's just very humble. He'd win a fight, he'd knock someone out, and then just walk back to his corner. Wouldn't jump around celebrating in the ring like they do nowadays. He was just an old school fighter. Tyson Tapes by Jonathan Rendell. Again, another Mike Tyson book I've kept hold of. People who knew Tyson and their experiences of life with him. I'm repeating myself now, aren't I? Serpico. His experiences as a police officer by Peter Mass. The dust cover didn't turn up, but I kept hold of it. If you like the film Serpico, then you'll like the book. S Street Rising by Ruben Castaneda. Crack, Murder and Redemption in DC. So the author was a journalist, but he was also hooked on drugs and his life as a drug addict and how he got himself off of it. Okay, that's it. There's some books here to end this video that are lined up, ready to read. I'm halfway through this book, The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. It's about the Blitz in London in the Second World War. Tough Jews by Rich Cohen. Jewish Gangsters in New York. Of course, Michael Jordan, The Life. Hillsborough, The Truth by Phil Scraton. It's about the football tragedy in Sheffield in 1989. David Dein, Calling the Shots, the former Arsenal Football Club chief executive. Ty Cobb by Charles Alexander, the former baseball player. The 100 Years War on Palestine. I found this book and I need to do my history on it. Seeing as it's in the news so much, dominates the news, by Rashid Khalidi. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. Yep, I will get round to reading this book at some point. One of the classic horror gothic novels. The Unknown Warrior by John Nichol. World War I book. And The Anarchy by William Dalrymple. It's about the British in India. So those books I'll get around to reading eventually. That's it. That's the book tour concluded. Hopefully one of these books you're going to get, do enjoy reading, happy reading, and thank you very much for watching.